A silent scream in the West Wing. A piercing shriek tore through the morning's quiet, splintering the air of the usually serene castle. It was Lady Seraphina's maid, her voice raw with terror, echoing from the East Wing, where the nobility resided. Ilara, polishing a silver tray in the antechamber, flinched, the clang of metal against stone betraying her surprise. A knot of dread tightened in her stomach. Something was terribly wrong. Within minutes, the castle was a hive of frantic activity. Servants scurried like panicked mice, guards barked orders, and the hushed whispers of Lord Valerius and dead began to spread like wildfire. Ilara found herself swept along with the surge of anxious staff, her heart thumping against her ribs. She had served Lord Valerius his evening tea just hours before, a calming chamomile blend he favoured. He had been well, if a little gruff, his usual self. Then came the accusation, sharp and sudden, delivered with the force of a physical blow. It was her! A guard bellowed, pointing a gauntleted finger directly at Ilara. She was the last one to see him alive. Chaos erupted. Lady Seraphina, her face mottled with grief and rage, shrieked, "The servant girl! She poisoned him! I saw her lurking near his rooms!" Ilara's breath hitched, her mind reeled, trying to grasp the impossible. Poison! Her! She opened her mouth to protest, to explain the chamomile, to declare her innocence, but no words came. Fear, cold and paralysing, choked her. Sir Cale Thorne, Lord Valerius's ambitious steward, stepped forward, his eyes, usually glinting with a superficial charm, now hard and calculating. "Silence, girl." His voice, normally smooth as polished stone, was laced with an uncharacteristic venom. He surveyed the chaotic scene, a predatory gleam in his gaze. "Lady Seraphina's testimony is damning, and your silence, Ilara, speaks volumes." He advanced, his presence radiating an intimidating authority. "Confess your treachery. Tell us what you did, and perhaps your punishment will be less severe." Ilara's eyes darted around, searching for a sympathetic face, a flicker of doubt. There was none, only suspicion, anger, and the chilling certainty of her guilt in their eyes. The weight of their collective judgment pressed down on her, suffocating her. I didn't," she stammered, her voice a mere whisper. Sir Cale's smile was chilling. "Such a pity. A quiet girl, always so diligent. Who would have thought such wickedness resided within you?" He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl meant for her ears alone. "Confess, Ilara. Now, or your family will pay the price for your stubbornness. Your sickly mother, your younger siblings. Imagine their fate, stripped of all protection." The words struck Ilara like physical blows. Her mother, her little brother and sister, their vulnerable faces flashed before her eyes. She pictured them cast out, starving, alone. The thought was 1,000 times worse than any torture she could imagine for herself. Her resolve crumbled. I did it," she whispered, the lie a bitter ash in her mouth. The words were not her own, but a desperate sacrifice torn from her soul to protect those she loved. Sir Cale straightened, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "There, she confesses. Take her to the West Wing, and ensure she receives no visitors, no food, no water, until her spirit is truly broken." The guards seized her, their hands rough. She was dragged through the castle, past familiar faces now twisted with condemnation, past the grand halls and bustling kitchens, towards the forgotten reaches of the West Wing. This abandoned section of the castle was a place of shadows and dust, whispered to be haunted, used only for storage, or as a place of confinement for those deemed too insignificant to truly matter. The air grew colder, the light dimmer, as they descended into its depths. The door creaked open, revealing a small, damp chamber, barren save for a thin, stained mattress on the floor. The stench of mildew and disuse hung heavy in the air. This was her new prison. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her, the clang echoing like a death knell. The bolt slid home with a resonant thud, severing her from the world, from light, from hope. She stood trembling in the oppressive darkness, the silence of the room pressing in on her, amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. The first night was a blur of terror and despair. She huddled on the rancid mattress, her body shaking uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face, silent rivers of grief for her lost freedom, her shattered reputation, and the crushing weight of a crime she didn't commit. Her throat ached from the effort of not screaming, not crying out for help that would never come. The second night brought a different kind of pain, a gnawing hunger and a parching thirst that made her lips crack. The damp cold seeped into her bones, chilling her to the core. Her mind, once sharp and observant, felt sluggish, clouded by fear and the relentless pressure of her confinement. She thought of her family, their faces blurred by the encroaching darkness of her despair. Had her sacrifice truly protected them, or had she merely traded one tragedy for another? As the hours bled into days, the initial terror slowly gave way to a profound, soul-deep loneliness. The silence of the West Wing became her tormentor, broken only by the rhythmic drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the darkness, and the soft, broken sounds that escaped her own lips. At first, they were mere whimpers, stifled by her fear of being heard, of being further punished. But as the isolation deepened, as the darkness became absolute, the whimpers grew into soft sobs, then into quiet, heartbroken cries that echoed faintly in the vast, empty spaces around her. She wasn't wailing, not yet, but a silent scream was building within her, a desperate plea for understanding, for justice, for salvation. Each soft sob was a lament, a fragile thread woven into the fabric of her despair, a sound so raw and pure it carried on the unseen currents of the castle, reaching beyond the cold stone walls of her prison, reaching for something, or someone, she didn't even know existed. The king's unease. The tapestries in King Theron's chambers were thick, woven with scenes of ancient hunts and regal feasts designed to muffle the world outside. Tonight, however, they offered no solace. The moon, a sliver of ice in the velvet sky, cast long skeletal shadows across his desk where stacks of unread decrees lay forgotten. Sleep, usually a welcome visitor after a day steeped in governance, eluded him. A strange, insistent ache throbbed behind his temples, a premonition he couldn't shake. He rose, his bare feet silent on the cold stone floor, and walked to the open balcony. The night air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Below, the castle grounds lay shrouded in a silence that felt unnatural, strained. Then it came again, a sound so fragile, so utterly broken, it was almost imperceptible. A low, keening sob, carried on the faintest whisper of wind. Theron paused, his powerful frame tensing. His hearing was keen, a gift of his lineage, but even he struggled to pinpoint its origin. It was too faint to be from the servants' quarters, too sorrowful to be a child's night terror. It was a woman's cry, stripped bare of all pretense, a raw expression of profound grief. And it was coming from the West Wing. Ilera. The name surfaced unbidden, a quiet tremor in his usually unwavering mind. He had signed the order for her imprisonment, the official reports from Cale Thorne detailing her confession, her alleged poisoning of Valerius echoing in his ears. He had seen the fear in her eyes during the hurried trial, but also something else, a flicker of defiance, quickly extinguished. He'd dismissed it then, attributing it to guilt. But this wasn't the sound of a guilty woman. This was the sound of a spirit fracturing, of a heart being torn asunder. Doubt, a serpent in his sanctuary, began to coil. Thorn had been too eager, too efficient. The confession had been extracted with alarming speed. Theron remembered the cold, calculating glint in Thorn's eyes, the way he had averted his gaze when Alara was led away. He had accepted the official narrative. Had to. The stability of the kingdom depended on swift justice. Yet, the memory of Alara's pale face, the trembling of her hands, now merged with the phantom cries, creating a dissonance that grated against his finely tuned sense of justice. He spent the rest of the night pacing, the spectral weeping a constant counterpoint to his agitated thoughts. By the time the first streaks of dawn painted the eastern sky, a decision had solidified. He would see for himself, not as the king, but as a man seeking truth. Later that day, under the cloak of twilight, Theron ventured toward the Forgotten Wing. He wore a simple, hooded cloak, his face obscured, his movements stealthy. The West Wing was a labyrinth of echoing corridors, dust-laden tapestries and locked doors. The air grew colder, heavier, with each step he took. The silence here was different from the rest of the castle. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket, thick with neglect. He found her cell at the very end of a narrow passage, its iron door bolted from the outside. No guards, no torches, just oppressive darkness. He pressed his ear against the cold, rough wood. At first there was only the sound of his own ragged breath. Then, a low murmur. "Please, let them be safe. Let them know. I didn't do it." Her voice was a whisper, raspy from tears, yet imbued with a desperate earnestness that pierced him to the core. She wasn't pleading for herself, not truly. She was pleading for others, for truth. "They threatened them," she continued, her voice breaking. "My mother, my sister. I had no choice." Theron's jaw tightened. Thorn had threatened her family. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had been so quick to condemn, so eager to accept the convenient truth. He had allowed an innocent woman to suffer, perhaps even to sacrifice herself, for the sake of a lie. The king's blood ran cold. This wasn't justice. This was manipulation, a cruel chess game played with human lives. He remained there for a long time, listening to her fragmented prayers, her desperate affirmations of innocence. Each whispered word chipped away at the edifice of his conviction, replacing it with a burning certainty. Alara Meadowsweet was not a poisoner. She was a victim, a pawn in a game he was only just beginning to understand. And he, the Alpha King, had been blind. A fierce protectiveness, dormant until this moment, stirred within him. He would not leave her to wither in this forgotten place. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost, and he would begin with the gentle, broken girl praying behind this very door. A royal decree and courtly fury. A hush fell over the assembled court, the usual murmur of silks and hushed conversations replaced by an anticipatory silence that crackled with unspoken questions. King Theron stood upon the raised dais, his presence a heavy weight in the sun-drenched throne room. His gaze swept across the faces of his council, pausing for a fraction longer on Sir Cale Thorn, whose customary smirk seemed a little too fixed today. "My lords and ladies." Theron's voice resonated, firm and clear, cutting through the silence like a honed blade. "A matter of grave importance demands our immediate attention. The prisoner, Alara Meadowsweet, currently held in the West Wing, is to be moved." A ripple of astonishment spread through the court. Theron allowed a moment for the news to settle, observing the myriad reactions. Faces contorted in surprise, confusion, and in some corners, outright disapproval. Sir Thorn, however, remained outwardly composed, though a muscle twitched in his jaw, betraying a flicker of inner turmoil. While her alleged crime is heinous, Theron continued, his tone unwavering, her sudden deterioration in health warrants concern. It is not the way of Blackwood to let even the condemned suffer unduly. Therefore I decree that Alara Meadowsweet be transferred to the Royal Infirmary, under the care of Meister Ulrich. She will remain under strict guard, of course, but her well-being will be seen to. The gasp that swept through the court was audible, a collective exhalation of disbelief. To move a confessed poisoner, a servant girl accused of murdering a noble, to the very heart of the royal castle's healing wing. It was an unprecedented act, a blatant subversion of protocol, and a clear signal that the king was not content with the official narrative. Sir Thorn's composure finally shattered. He stepped forward, his voice tight with barely suppressed fury. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, this is highly irregular. The girl confessed her treachery. To grant her such leniency sends a dangerous message to those who would seek to harm the crown." A chorus of agreement erupted from Thorn's allies, their indignant shouts echoing through the hall. Lord Fenris, a burly man with a florid face, boomed, "She's a viper, Your Majesty, a common viper who slithered into our midst and struck down a good man. She deserves the deepest dungeon, not the infirmary." Lady Seraphina, her face a mask of aristocratic disdain, added, "This is an insult to Valerius's memory, King Theron. Are we to believe his death is now a matter for well-being?" Theron's eyes, usually a calm, deep grey, hardened to flint. He raised a hand, and the court, though buzzing with resentment, fell silent once more. "I remind you, my lords and ladies, that justice is not merely swift judgment, but also truth. Meister Ulrich's assessment of her condition is not to be questioned. And," he added, his gaze sweeping pointedly over Thorn and his cohorts, "the security of the crown is always paramount. Should her health truly fail, it would raise more questions than answers. She will be healed, and then she will face the full weight of justice. Until then, my decree stands." The finality in his voice brooked no further argument. Sir Thorn's face was a mask of barely contained rage, his knuckles white where he gripped the hilt of his ceremonial dagger. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, now burned with a dangerous fire, a silent promise of retribution. The king's decision, though seemingly a humanitarian gesture, was a direct challenge to Thorn's authority and his carefully constructed narrative. Meanwhile, in the dim, cold confines of her cell, Alara Meadowsweet huddled, shivering. The days had blurred into an endless, grey nightmare of despair and self-reproach. She had confessed, had damned herself, all to protect her family. Now even that seemed a hollow victory, for she was certain her end was near. The heavy thud of boots outside her cell door roused her from her stupor. She flinched, expecting the grim faces of her executioners. Instead, the door creaked open to reveal two royal guards, their faces impassive beneath their polished helmets. "Prisoner Meadowsweet," one of them stated, his voice devoid of inflection. "You are to come with us. By order of King Theron." Fear, sharp and cold, pierced through Alara. Was this it, then? A more private execution, away from prying eyes. She stumbled to her feet, her limbs weak from malnourishment and disuse, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. They led her through winding corridors she had never seen, the stone walls gradually giving way to warmer, more ornate tapestries. The air grew fresher, carrying faint scents of herbs and beeswax. Confusion warred with her terror. This was not the path to the gallows. Finally, they halted before a door carved with the crest of the royal healers. The guard pushed it open, revealing a warm, brightly lit room with several beds, each curtained for privacy. Meister Ulrich, a kind-faced man with a shock of white hair, looked up from tending to a young boy's scraped knee, his eyes widening slightly as he saw her. "Ilara Meadowsweet, by royal decree, you are under my care," Meister Ulrich announced, his voice gentle despite the formality. "You are still a prisoner, but here you will be treated. Your health will be restored." Ilara stood rooted to the spot, her mind struggling to process the sudden shift. The infirmary was a sanctuary, a place of healing and comfort. She was still guarded, the two royal soldiers positioned at the door, a stark reminder of her status. But the cold, soul-crushing isolation of the West Wing was gone. Here, there was light. Here, there was the faint, hopeful scent of chamomile. She wasn't utterly alone anymore. A fragile flicker of hope, hesitant and almost painful, ignited within her chest. The king had not abandoned her. He had moved her. But why? Seeds of trust. The infirmary, a stark contrast to her dank cell, offered a different kind of existence. Sunlight, diffident and pale, seeped through tall arched windows, illuminating the pristine white sheets and gleaming floorboards. The air, redolent with antiseptic and soothing herbs, purged the stench of mildew and her recent despair. Ilara, adrift in a feverish haze, registered these shifts in fragmented sensations, a cool compress on her brow, the soft murmur of a nurse's voice, surprisingly palatable broth that tasted of chicken and parsley. Not desperation. Gradually, painstakingly, her body began its recovery. The tremors that had seized her limbs receded. The gnawing ache in her bones softened, and the fever broke, leaving her frail but lucid. Her mind, however, remained a churning battleground. The spectre of execution lingered, a phantom chill even beneath the warmth of the blankets. Sir Kael'thorne's furious face materialized in the shadows, the bite of chains on her wrists a phantom sensation. Yet, a new, equally arresting image emerged. The king's unyielding gaze, the unexpected resilience in his voice. He had orchestrated her presence here, saving her, if only for the moment. This thought, a defiant spark, flickered against the vast darkness of her fear. During the quiet hours, when the infirmary staff dwindled, he arrived. Not with pomp or procession, but alone, a shadow slipping through the doorway. His presence, even in the soft lamplight, commanded the space, yet his approach was hushed, almost deferential. He would pause at the foot of her bed, his eyes, dark as a winter sky, assessing her. Ilara would freeze, breath caught, certain this heralded her final judgment. But he never uttered a word of punishment. His initial queries were always simple, almost prosaic. "How do you feel today, Ilara?" He'd inquire, his voice a low, resonant rumble. Initially, she could only manage a choked whisper, a nod, her gaze darting like a trapped bird. But as days blurred into weeks, and his visits became a quiet ritual, a fragile connection began to knit between them. He never prodded, never demanded answers. He'd ask about her meals, the quality of the broth, the nurse's demeanor, seemingly trivial questions, yet they steadily began to chip away at the icy barrier around her heart. One evening, he settled onto the small chair beside her bed, his gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the quilt. "Tell me about the castle kitchens, Ilara," he said, his tone devoid of accusation, merely curious. "You spent a long time there, didn't you?" Ilara's hands, pale and slender on the blanket, twitched. The kitchens. A lifetime ago, it seemed. "Yes, Your Majesty," she managed, her voice still raspy from disuse. "Since I was a girl." "And what was your favourite part?" he prompted. The question caught her off guard. Favourite part? She had never considered it so. It had simply been her life. "The smell, Your Majesty," she confessed, a faint memory stirring. "In the mornings when the bread was baking, warm and sweet, and the spices when Cook Eleanor would prepare the special feast dishes, cinnamon and cloves." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a ghost of a girl who had known simpler joys. He listened, his expression unreadable, yet she sensed no judgment, only an unexpected openness. "Cook Eleanor," he mused, "a formidable woman, as I recall." Elara nodded, a tiny flicker of her old self resurfacing. "She was fair, Your Majesty, strict but fair." He nodded slowly. "And before the kitchens? Where did you live?" Her breath hitched. This was where the questions veered into perilous territory, where truth could condemn. But his eyes, though piercing, held no malice, only a quiet patience. "In the village, Your Majesty," she whispered, her gaze dropping to her hands. "With my mother. She was a healer." A flicker in his eyes. He didn't press. He simply absorbed the information, a silent understanding passing between them. He lingered for a while longer, inquiring about the herbs her mother used, the ailments she treated. Elara, to her own astonishment, found herself speaking more freely, words tumbling out, born not of fear but of a strange, burgeoning trust. She spoke of her mother's gentle touch, the wisdom in her eyes, the intricate patterns of leaves and roots. As he rose to depart that night, his shadow stretching long across the floor, he paused at the doorway. "Rest, Elara," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "There is much to understand." And for the first time in months, Elara Meadowsweet closed her eyes not in terror, but with a faint, fragile ember of hope warming her chest. The king, the formidable ruler of their lands, saw not merely a prisoner, but a person, and in that quiet acknowledgement, a seed of trust, delicate but resilient, began to sprout in her broken heart. Whispers of betrayal, the scent of beeswax and old parchment clung to King Theron as he moved through the hushed chambers of the castle, a stark contrast to the sterile air of the infirmary where Elara now rested. His boots made no sound on the polished stone, his mind already a labyrinth of questions and half-formed theories. He had dismissed his usual retinue, preferring the silent company of his own thoughts as he sought to unravel the tangled threads of Lord Valerius's death. His first stop was the private study where the noble had taken his last breath. The room, largely undisturbed since the initial investigation, still held the faint, sickly, sweet aroma of the poison, a memory of the final, agonizing moments. Theron's gaze swept over the meticulously kept desk, the leather-bound ledgers, the inkpot and quill. His eyes narrowed on a particular detail, often overlooked in the chaos of a sudden death. The teacups. 2 sat on a silver tray, one empty, the other still half full, a dark residue clinging to its porcelain. But it was the position that bothered him. The poisoned cup, by all accounts, was the one Valerius had drunk from. Yet it was the unpoisoned one that sat closest to the armrest of the ornate chair, as if it had been the one within easy reach. A small detail, perhaps, but one that gnawed at the edges of his logic. Why would a man reach across for a second cup when one was already at hand? Unless the cups had been swapped, or the account of which cup was drunk from was inaccurate. He moved to the window, the heavy velvet drapes drawn back to reveal a view of the inner courtyard. A fine crack spiderwebbed across one of the panes, low down, almost imperceptible unless one was actively searching. The official report made no mention of a broken window. A maid, perhaps, had accidentally struck it, or something more sinister. The thought lingered, a faint discord in the symphony of carefully constructed facts. Theron then turned his attention to the stacks of documents that had been recovered from Valerius's personal effects. The late lord had been known for his meticulous record-keeping, a habit that now proved invaluable. Hours melted away as Theron delved into the noble's recent correspondence, his political dealings, and finally, a draft of a proposed new law. As he read, a cold knot formed in his stomach. The law, still in its nascent stages, aimed to redistribute ancestral lands that had lain fallow for generations, granting them to commoners for cultivation and ownership. A noble concept, in theory. In practice, it was a direct assault on the inherited wealth and power of several of the kingdom's oldest and most influential families. Families who had grown fat on their sprawling, unproductive estates. Families who stood to lose a significant portion of their prestige and influence should such a law pass. The implication struck Theron with the force of a physical blow. Valerius hadn't merely been a victim of a disgruntled servant. He had been a man with powerful enemies, enemies who would have seen his progressive ideals as a direct threat to their very existence. The simple tale of a kitchen girl's revenge suddenly felt far too simple, too convenient. Later that evening, Theron found himself in the common dining hall, a place he rarely frequented, preferring the solitude of his own chambers. He had come to observe, to listen, to see how the court reacted to the burgeoning scandal. Ilara's confinement, far from being a quiet affair, had become a whispering campaign, fueled by speculation and thinly veiled accusations. As he sat, a silent observer at a table set slightly apart, his gaze was drawn across the room. Sir Cale Thorne stood near the hearth, ostensibly engaged in conversation with a minor baron, but his eyes, sharp and predatory, were fixed on the infirmary wing. Not on the infirmary itself, Theron realized with a jolt, but on the window of Ilara's room, a sliver of light visible through the curtains. The intensity of Thorne's gaze was unsettling, a possessive, almost obsessive focus that betrayed more than simple concern for justice. It was the look of a man who had a vested interest, a deeply personal stake in Ilara's fate. And suddenly, the pieces began to click into place, the swift conviction, the lack of a thorough investigation, the eagerness to have her condemned. Thorne had been too quick, too zealous, too eager to silence her. A chill snaked its way down Theron's spine. He had trusted Sir Cale, valued his counsel. But now, in the flickering light of the hearth, Thorne's watchful, calculating eyes on Ilara's distant window painted a far more sinister picture. The whispers of betrayal were no longer just a faint rustle. They were a rising chorus, a dissonant symphony that spoke of a truth far darker than he had dared to imagine. He would protect Ilara, not just from the poisoner, but from the shadow that now loomed over them both. The truth unveiled. Ilara watched the king, her heart a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. The infirmary, a haven compared to the dank cell, suddenly felt stifling. Theron's presence, though a comfort, also brought a new kind of terror. He sat on the edge of the cot opposite hers, his gaze steady and unwavering. The air crackled with unspoken questions, with the weight of her predicament. She picked at a loose thread on the blanket, her fingers trembling. "You've been through a great ordeal, Ilara," Theron finally said, his voice a low rumble that resonated through the quiet room. "But I need you to be truthful with me, completely. Your life, and perhaps more than just yours, depends on it." She flinched, her eyes darting to the closed door, then back to his face. Trusting him felt like stepping off a cliff, but the alternative was a return to the abyss. I told you everything I know about Lord Valerius," she whispered, her throat dry. "I swear it." Theron leaned forward slightly, his expression softening, yet his eyes held an unwavering intensity. I believe you were framed, Alara. The evidence against you is convenient. Too convenient. He paused, allowing the words to sink in. What I need to know is why you were chosen. Who benefits from your silence, and why were you so eager to confess to a crime you didn't commit? The last question hit her like a physical blow. Her breath hitched. The memory of Thorne's cold eyes, his chilling words, flooded her mind. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting against the rising panic. He threatened me, she choked out, the words barely audible. Theron's jaw tightened. Thorne, he asked, his voice now edged with steel. She nodded, tears pricking her eyelids. He came to my cell. After the initial questioning, he said if I didn't confess, my family, my little brother, my mother, he would ensure they suffered. Her voice broke, a small, raw sound of anguish. He knew where they lived, told me details only someone who had watched them would know. He said they would be arrested for treason, for aiding a murderer if I didn't comply. A fresh wave of tears streamed down her face. I had no choice, Your Majesty. I couldn't let them be harmed because of me. Theron's hand, large and calloused, covered her trembling one. The unexpected warmth startled her, and she looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes, usually cool and discerning, now burned with a quiet fury she hadn't seen before. He threatened your family, he repeated, the words slow and deliberate, as if tasting their venom. To ensure your confession, to ensure your silence. A shiver ran down Alara's spine, not of cold, but of a dawning, terrifying understanding. He said it would be swift, if I just confessed. A quick trial, a quick end. No one would question it. Theron's grip on her hand tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked away for a moment, his gaze fixed on some distant point, his brow furrowed in deep thought, the silence stretched, heavy and charged. Alara could almost feel the gears turning in his mind, connecting the disparate pieces. The cracked window in Valerius's study, the political ramifications of the proposed law, Thorne's unsettling fixation on her infirmary window, and now, these threats. It was a tapestry of deceit, far more intricate and sinister than a simple poisoning. His eyes returned to hers, piercing and resolute. He didn't just want you framed, Alara, Theron said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, laden with a chilling certainty. He wanted you gone, permanently. He wanted to silence you before you could ever speak the truth, before anyone could look beyond the superficial evidence. The full horror of it washed over Alara. She wasn't merely a scapegoat, she was a loose end to be cleanly severed. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through her, and she clutched at the blanket. But why me? Why go to such lengths? Theron shook his head, his gaze distant once more. That, Alara, is what we are going to find out. But rest assured, Sir Cale Thorne's interest in your fate is far more personal, far more malevolent than I initially surmised. And if he believes you are silenced, he will be gravely mistaken. His words, firm and unwavering, instilled a fragile hope within her. It was a terrifying prospect, confronting such a powerful man, but with the king's protection, perhaps, just perhaps, she had a chance. The weight of her secret, now shared, felt a fraction lighter, though the shadows of fear still clung to her heart. The battle, she realized, was far from over. It had only just begun. A king's justice. The massive oak doors of the throne room groaned open, their resonant thud echoing through the chamber and quelling the usual morning chatter of courtiers. King Theron, his expression a mask of inscrutability, yet radiating potent authority, strode to his seat. A hush, deeper than any heard before, descended upon the assembly, his gaze, sharp and piercing, swept across the expectant faces before briefly snagging on Sir Cale Thorne, who, amidst the royal guard, found his customary poise momentarily disturbed. "My lords, ladies, esteemed members of this court," Theron's voice, though not raised, carried with effortless command to every corner of the vast space. "I have summoned you this morning to declare a matter of paramount importance to the Crown and to the very bedrock of justice within our realm." A tremor of unease rippled through the assembled ranks. Whispers, quick and low, began to stir, but a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening of Theron's jaw instantly silenced them. His eyes, like polished chips of obsidian, held every soul present captive. The case of Alara Meadowsweet, accused and condemned for the poisoning of Lord Valerius, has undergone my personal scrutiny. Theron continued, his tone hardening to steel. It has become clear that certain discrepancies have emerged. Gasps punctuated his pronouncement. Thorne stiffened, his hand instinctively gripping the hilt of his ceremonial blade. A pulse throbbed visibly in his temple. "Therefore," Theron declared with resonant finality, "I hereby command a new hearing for Alara Meadowsweet. This will be no mere re-examination. This will be a special court, presided over by myself, to unearth the complete truth behind Lord Valerius's demise and the circumstances surrounding Miss Meadowsweet's initial confession." The shock was palpable. Courtiers exchanged wide-eyed glances, murmuring in disbelief. Sir Cale Thorne, however, did not murmur. His face, usually a picture of composed confidence, was now contorted with barely restrained fury. He stepped forward, his voice tight with dangerous deference. "Your Majesty," Thorne interjected, a sharp edge to his tone. "With all due respect, the matter of the servant girl was resolved. Her guilt was established, her confession recorded. To reopen this, it risks eroding the very authority of this court and casting doubt upon the diligence of your appointed investigators." Theron's gaze locked onto Thorne, cold and unwavering. "Are you questioning my judgment, Sir Cale?" The question hung in the air, a silken cord threatening to constrict. Thorne swallowed, his bravado momentarily deflating. "No, Your Majesty, merely seeking clarification. The kingdom mourns Lord Valerius. To drag this affair back into the public eye, to suggest injustice where none was apparent, might be seen as unsettling." "Unsettling for whom, Sir Cale?" Theron's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "For those who prefer convenient falsehoods over inconvenient truths." He paused, allowing the weighty implication to settle. "Let it be known. Alara Meadowsweet will attend this hearing, not as a prisoner awaiting further condemnation, but as a protected witness under the direct aegis of the Crown. She will be afforded every protection, and her testimony will be heard without prejudice or intimidation." The announcement hit the court like a thunderclap. A protected witness? The condemned servant girl? Whispers erupted into a cacophony of astonishment and outrage. Thorne's face, a moment ago aflame with fury, now paled noticeably. The ramifications of such a declaration were immense. It hinted at a profound betrayal, a deliberate manipulation that far exceeded a simple error in judgment. Leaving the stunned assembly to absorb his pronouncements, Theron withdrew to his private chambers. The air crackled with anticipation, a dangerous energy he knew would only intensify. He settled at his large, polished desk. Maps of the kingdom spread before him, though his thoughts were far from territorial disputes. He retrieved a small, leather-bound journal, not an official ledger, but a personal record of observations, anomalies, and instincts. His quill scratched rhythmically across the parchment, documenting dates, names, small details from the original investigation that had persistently nagged at him, events surrounding Lord Valerius's death, and Thorn's inexplicably zealous prosecution of Ilara. He meticulously cross-referenced his notes with snippets of information Ilara had shared. The puzzle pieces, once scattered and seemingly disparate, slowly began to interlock, forming a disturbing mosaic. He knew Thorn was a formidable adversary, cunning and ruthless. This would not be a simple presentation of evidence. It would be a battle of wills, a dismantling of a meticulously constructed illusion. Theron's mind raced, anticipating Thorn's every potential maneuver, every desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling deception. He considered Thorn's likely accomplices, the intricate web of influence he might have spun. He needed allies, individuals whose loyalty was beyond question, whose insight could pierce through Thorn's machinations. He summoned his most trusted chamberlain, Lord Gareth, a man whose quiet efficiency was matched only by his unwavering discretion. "Gareth," Theron began, his voice low and intense, "send for Master Rees, the royal scribe. Inform him he is to prepare for an extensive recording of all proceedings, and have him bring the most secure parchment available. Also, dispatch a discreet message to Captain Valerius, Lord Valerius's younger brother. Inform him of the special hearing. He should attend." Gareth, ever stoic, simply nodded, his expression revealing nothing but understanding. As Gareth departed, Theron returned to his journal, his brow furrowed in concentration. The game had begun, and Theron, the king, was determined to ensure justice, not only for Ilara but for the very soul of his kingdom. He would expose the rot at its core, no matter how high it reached. In the infirmary, Ilara, still weak but with a fragile flicker of hope now burning within her, listened to the faint, distant sounds filtering through the thick stone walls. The court was abuzz. She didn't know the specifics, but the atmosphere had decidedly shifted. A small, almost imperceptible tremor of anticipation ran through her. Outside her door, Thorn, who had been speaking in hushed, urgent tones with one of his guards, paused. His eyes, sharp and predatory, seemed to pierce the heavy oak door, as if he could see straight to Ilara within. A flicker of something dark and possessive crossed his features before he turned, resuming his conversation, though his voice was now laced with a new, dangerous urgency. His focus, however, remained fixed on the room that held Ilara. The accusation. The special court convened in a smaller, more intimate chamber than the grand hall, its stone walls seeming to absorb the nervous whispers and the clatter of hastily arranged benches. King Theron sat on a raised dais, not on a throne, but behind a simple, sturdy oak table, a stark contrast to the opulence of his usual position. His gaze swept over the assembly, settling for a moment on Ilara, who sat on a plain wooden chair, guarded but not chained, her face pale but her eyes holding a flicker of something new, resolve. Across the room, Sir Cale Thorn stood rigid, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between Ilara and the king, a predator cornered but not yet subdued. Theron began without preamble, his voice measured, cutting through the thick silence. This court is called to re-examine the charges against Ilara Meadowsweet concerning the death of Lord Valerius. The evidence presented in the initial inquiry, I believe, was incomplete and, in some instances, misleading. He gestured to a series of covered items on a side table. We begin with the physical evidence. A royal guard unveiled a small, ornate vial. This was presented as the container for the poison used to kill Lord Valerius. It was found in Ilara Meadowsweet's possession. Theron held it up, the glass catching the flickering candlelight. However, upon closer inspection, my own alchemists discovered residual traces within this vial, not of belladonna, the purported poison, but of a common sleeping draught, known to induce heavy slumber, not death. A murmur rippled through the court. Sir Cale Thorn shifted, his hand instinctively gripping the hilt of his sword. Theron's eyes, sharp and unwavering, met Thorn's. "Furthermore," Theron continued, "the goblet from which Lord Valerius drank was thoroughly re-examined. While it indeed contained traces of belladonna, the concentration was far higher than could have been administered by a single dose from this vial, even if it had contained the poison. It suggests a pre-prepared, highly potent solution, not something a kitchen servant would have easy access to or the knowledge to concoct." He presented a detailed report, its pages rustling softly. The belladonna found in Lord Valerius's system was of a rare strain, cultivated only in specific regions known for their medicinal gardens, not common in the palace's stores, or easily acquired without significant connections. Theron paused, letting the implications hang in the air. The original investigation failed to pursue the source of this potent toxin, instead focusing solely on the servant girl found near the victim. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Thorn's face, usually a mask of controlled arrogance, now showed a faint sheen of sweat. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. "Elara Meadowsweet," Theron called, his voice softening slightly as he turned to her. "The court will now hear your testimony. You are under my protection, and I assure you, you will speak freely and without fear." Elara took a deep, trembling breath, her gaze finding Theron's, drawing strength from his unwavering resolve. She rose, her simple dress rustling. Her voice, though soft, carried clearly in the hushed chamber. "Your Majesty, members of the court, I swear on my life I did not poison Lord Valerius." She paused, gathering her courage. "When Lord Valerius was found, dead, I was the first to discover him. Sir Cale Thorn arrived shortly after. He immediately accused me. He didn't ask questions, he didn't investigate, he just knew." Her eyes flickered to Thorn, who flinched almost imperceptibly. "He took me to a secluded room," Elara continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength. "He told me that if I didn't confess, my younger sister Lily, who works in the laundry, would be accused alongside me. He said she would be implicated, that he would ensure she was found guilty, and that both our families would suffer. He showed me a small, carved wooden bird, Lily's favourite toy, one I had made for her. He said it would be found near Lord Valerius's body, linking her directly to the crime." A gasp swept through the room. Thorn's face was now a ghastly shade, his eyes wide with a frantic, cornered animal's desperation. He clenched his fists, knuckles white. "He held the vial of sleeping draught in front of me," Elara went on, her gaze fixed on Thorn. "He told me to say I had used it, that I had bought it to poison Lord Valerius. He said if I confessed, only I would suffer and my sister would be spared. He promised that if I followed his instructions, Lily would be safe, and my family would not be harmed beyond my own condemnation." Tears welled in Elara's eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to break. "I was terrified, Your Majesty. I believed him. I believed he would hurt Lily. I confessed to save her. He dictated my words. He made me sign a statement I didn't write, a confession filled with lies." The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating. Every eye in the room was fixed on Sir Cale Thorn, whose carefully constructed composure had shattered. His face was a roadmap of guilt, fear, and barely suppressed rage. He looked like a man trapped, his elaborate deception laid bare by the quiet, brave words of the woman he had sought to destroy. The air crackled with the unspoken accusation, a palpable wave of disgust and outrage washing over the court. The king's steady gaze remained on Thorn, a silent, damning judgment. Betrayal exposed. King Theron's voice, usually a measured baritone, now boomed through the grand hall, each word a hammer blow against the fragile silence. "Sir Cale Thorn," he declared, his gaze locking onto the knight. You stand accused not merely of coercing a false confession, but of the calculated murder of Lord Valerius and the malicious framing of an innocent woman. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled courtiers, a wave of shock washing over their faces. Elara, standing beside Theron, felt a tremor run through her, not of fear, but of vindication. Sir Cale, who had maintained a facade of rigid defiance, finally buckled. His shoulders slumped, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route that no longer existed. "Lies!" Thorn roared, his voice cracking, a desperate, animalistic sound. "These are baseless accusations. She confessed. The poison was found in her possession." He gestured wildly towards Elara, his finger trembling. "She is a common servant, a schemer." Theron raised a hand, silencing the knight with a gesture that commanded absolute authority. "The poison was planted, Thorn. And the confession? It was extracted under duress, a cruel manipulation of a young woman's love for her sister." Theron's eyes, usually a placid grey, now burned with an icy fury. "We have proof, Sir Cale. Proof that you purchased a rare, fast-acting toxin from a merchant in the northern marches, a merchant who has since confirmed the transaction and your specific instructions regarding its potency and undetectable nature." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Thorn's face, already ashen, drained of all remaining colour. His breath hitched, and he took an involuntary step back, bumping into the ornate chair behind him. "And why, Sir Cale?" Theron pressed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hall. "Why orchestrate such a heinous act? Why destroy an innocent life and defile the very halls of justice you swore to uphold?" He paused, allowing the question to resonate before delivering the final, devastating blow. "Because Lord Valerius had uncovered your embezzlement of royal funds meant for the upkeep of our northern garrisons. He was preparing to expose you, to strip you of your title and your ill-gotten gains. You murdered him to silence him, and then you sought to bury your crime beneath the ruin of Elara Meadowsweet." The grand hall erupted. Whispers turned into murmurs, then a cacophony of shocked exclamations. Courtiers craned their necks, their eyes wide with disbelief and disgust as they stared at Thorn. The knight, once held in high esteem, now stood exposed as a traitor and a murderer. "No! You cannot prove this!" Thorn shrieked, his composure completely shattered. He lunged forward, his hands clenching into fists, but the royal guards, anticipating his desperation, moved swiftly to intercept him. Their halberds crossed, forming an impenetrable barrier, forcing him back. Elara watched him, a strange mix of emotions swirling within her. There was the satisfaction of justice finally being served, the relief of her name being cleared, but also a profound sadness for the depths of human depravity. She had seen his rage before, in the dark confines of the interrogation room, but now it was raw, unbridled, and pathetic. Theron continued, his gaze unwavering. "Lord Valerius kept meticulous records, Sir Cale. Records that detail your illicit transactions, your forged documents, and the precise sums you siphoned from the crown. These records were discovered in a hidden compartment within his study, a compartment you clearly overlooked in your haste." He gestured to a royal scribe, who stepped forward, holding a thick, leather-bound ledger. "This ledger, along with the merchant's testimony, paints an undeniable picture of your guilt." Thorn whimpered, a sound utterly devoid of dignity. He began to tremble violently, his legs threatening to give out. The weight of the accusation, the irrefutable evidence, and the gaze of the entire court bore down upon him, crushing him. You will regret this," Thorn stammered, his eyes glazed with a desperate fury, aimed not at Theron, but at Elara. "You will all regret this." Theron stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Alara's back, a silent gesture of protection. His eyes, now fixed on Thorn, were cold and resolute. "I regret nothing, Sir Cale. Justice, though delayed, will always prevail. You have betrayed your king, your oath, and your honour. You will face the full extent of royal law." The guards, with grim efficiency, moved in. Thorn, his spirit broken, offered no further resistance. He was led away, his once proud stride now a shambling shuffle, his cries of denial fading into the background as the heavy doors of the grand hall closed behind him. A stunned silence descended once more, but this time it was a silence filled with the echoes of justice and the quiet promise of a new beginning. A new dawn. The oppressive weight that had crushed Alara's spirit for weeks finally lifted, not with a sudden rush, but a gradual, exhilarating release. King Theron's voice, clear and resonant, echoed through the grand hall, declaring her innocent of all charges. Each word was a healing balm, washing away the stain of false accusation. She stood before the assembled court, a fragile figure in borrowed finery, and felt the gazes upon her shift from suspicion to dawning understanding, then to outright awe. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the room as the crowd absorbed the full extent of Sir Cal's perfidy and her vindication. The air, thick moments before with tension, now hummed with a nascent hope. A quiet gasp escaped her lips as Theron extended his hand, not in judgment, but in an offering of respect. "Ilara Meadowsweet," he stated, his eyes, the colour of a stormy sea, holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your courage in the face of such injustice, your unwavering spirit, has illuminated a darkness that threatened to consume us all. It is with profound gratitude and a desire to right the wrongs you have suffered that I offer you a place of honour within my court. You shall reside here, under my direct protection, and serve as an advisor on matters of justice, for who better understands its true meaning than one who has been so grievously wronged?" The murmurs that followed were not of dissent, but of astonishment. A commoner, an accused, elevated to such a position. It was unheard of. Yet as Theron's gaze swept across the faces of his nobles, none dared voice an objection. His decision once made was absolute. Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck, a strange mix of humility and burgeoning pride. She was no longer just the servant girl, the scapegoat. She was Ilara, and she had a purpose. Later that evening, after the last of the celebratory toasts had been offered and the court dispersed, Ilara found herself in the quiet solitude of the royal library, a space she had only ever glimpsed from afar. The scent of aged parchment and polished wood filled the air, a comforting aroma. She traced the spines of ancient tomes, her fingers lingering on titles that spoke of forgotten histories and powerful magic. A soft cough drew her attention, and she turned to see King Theron standing in the arched doorway, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows behind him. He had shed his formal regalia, now dressed in a simple tunic and trousers, looking less like a king and more like a man burdened by thought. "Forgive my intrusion," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "But I wish to speak with you, away from the prying ears of the court." Ilara curtsied, a movement that felt less automatic and more heartfelt now. "Your Majesty, you are always welcome." He stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the shelves before settling on her. "I have been reflecting on everything, on how close we came to a terrible miscarriage of justice, on how easily a carefully constructed lie can unravel the lives of innocents." He paused, his gaze distant, as if reliving the events. "I should have seen it sooner. The inconsistencies, the desperation in Thorn's eyes. He shook his head, a flicker of self-reproach in his expression. "You saw it when it mattered, Your Majesty," Alara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "That is what counts." He offered a faint, weary smile. "Perhaps. But it was your strength, Alara, your refusal to break, that truly opened my eyes. You faced down a powerful man, and you did not yield." He took a step closer, his presence commanding yet gentle. "I confess, when I first heard of the accusations against you, I believed them. The evidence as presented was damning. But then, I heard you." Ilara's heart fluttered. She remembered those nights in the Forgotten Wing, the quiet despair that had driven her to tears, the unburdening of her soul into the stone walls. "Through the walls, in the dead of night," Theron continued, his voice barely a whisper. "Your sorrow. It was too real, too profound for a guilty woman. It was then I began to question." He took another step, closing the small distance between them. The air crackled with an unspoken energy. His eyes, usually so guarded, held a vulnerability she hadn't anticipated. "You have shown me a truth I had forgotten, Alara. That justice is not merely about laws and evidence, but about the human heart, about the whispers that tell us when something is profoundly wrong." He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before gently cupping her cheek. His touch was warm, comforting, yet sent a shiver through her. Her breath hitched, the memory of Thorn's brutal grip, his cold accusations receded, replaced by the soft press of Theron's thumb against her skin. It was a gesture of profound tenderness, a silent acknowledgement of all she had endured, all she had overcome. "This court," Theron murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "This kingdom. It is stronger for your presence, Alara. And I believe I am too." The unspoken words hung in the air, potent and fragile, a promise of something new and extraordinary. Alara met his gaze, her own eyes wide with a burgeoning understanding. The world, once a dark and treacherous place, suddenly shimmered with the dawn of a new, unexpected possibility.